You walk into the kitchen with a clear mission, and by the time you're standing there, it's gone. Total blank. Maybe it's your phone charger. Maybe it's the reason you opened the fridge. Maybe it's the sentence you were about to say before you switched rooms. And the second that happens, a little voice whispers, "Is this it? Is this the memory slipping people warn you about after 35? Here's the twist. That exact blank moment happens to sharp 20-year-old brains too, every single time they cross a doorway. There's a hidden mechanism your brain runs constantly, and it has nothing to do with aging. It's about how your mind quietly closes one scene and opens another the moment you pass through a threshold. So the real question isn't why is your memory failing? It's why does walking through a doorway make your brain hit delete? Somewhere between the fridge and the hallway, something in your head flips a switch. Not a broken switch, a deliberate one. And once you see what it's actually doing, that panicked feeling starts to make a lot less sense. Here's what's actually happening inside your head. Your brain doesn't experience your day as one long, unbroken stream of thought. It chops your day into scenes, almost like a movie editor cutting footage into clips. Each room, each task, each setting becomes its own little chapter, and your brain needs a way to know when one chapter ends and the next one begins. It turns out a doorway is one of the clearest signals it has for that. You physically change environments, the lighting shifts, the sounds shift, the layout shifts, and your brain reads all of that as a cue. New scene starting now. The instant you cross that threshold, something like a filing action happens. Picture your brain as a very efficient but slightly ruthless assistant. The moment you walk through a door, that assistant closes the folder for the room you just left, whether you were finished with it or not, and opens a fresh folder for the new room. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't check if you were still using something from the old folder. It just closes it because that's its job, keeping your mental workspace clean and organized, one scene at a time. This is why you can be halfway through a sentence in the living room, walk into the hallway, and suddenly lose the entire thread of what you were saying. The folder for the living room conversation got closed the moment you crossed that line. Now here's the part that should actually bring you some relief. Whatever thought you were holding onto right before you crossed that threshold doesn't get deleted. It gets archived. Think of it less like hitting the delete key and more like your brain sliding a piece of paper into a folder and putting that folder back on a shelf labeled with the room you were just standing in. The thought still exists. It's just been filed under a location, instead of staying loose in your hands. That's why, when you walk back into the original room, the thought often comes rushing back almost instantly. Standing in that kitchen doorway again, looking at the same counter, the same light, the same angle, is like pulling that folder back off the shelf. Your brain sees the old scene and reopens the file, and suddenly you remember, oh right, I came in here for my glasses. This filing system isn't some strange side effect of modern, overstimulated life. It's not caused by too many notifications or too much screen time. Your brain has been sorting physical spaces into distinct memory files for as long as brains have existed, because location has always been a useful way to organize experience. Early humans needed to remember which cave led to water and which clearing had the berries, and tying thoughts to physical context was an efficient way to store that information. So when this happens to you today, you're not experiencing some new symptom of modern overload. You're watching an ancient piece of mental architecture do exactly what it has always done. Just now the caves are rooms in your house, and the berries are your car keys. You'll also notice this same blank moment happens outside of doorways entirely. Close your laptop after being deep in one task, then open it again 10 minutes later, and there's often a similar flicker of, wait, what was I doing? Switch from one browser tab to another and back, and sometimes the thread you were following feels oddly harder to pick back up. That's the same event boundary mechanism at work. Your brain doesn't only use physical doorways as scene breaks, it uses any clear shift in context, digital or physical, as a cue that one mental file should close so another can open. Here's where it gets more relevant to how your days actually feel. This reset hits much harder when your attention is already split before you even reach the doorway. Imagine you're carrying two conversations at once, thinking about a work email, while also holding on to the thought that you need to grab your charger. Your mental bandwidth is already stretched thin, holding multiple things open at the same time. There's less spare capacity to keep that charger thought firmly in place while you're walking. So when the doorway triggers its usual scene change, there isn't enough leftover attention holding the door open on that particular thought, and it gets swept into the archive along with everything else from the old room. This is why the blank moments seem to multiply on busy, distracted days, and almost disappear on quiet, focused ones. It was never really about how old you are. It was about how many folders your assistant was already juggling in that moment. And this is exactly why walking back to the original room works so reliably to bring the thought back. It's not a lucky coincidence, it's the mechanism running in reverse. The room itself still holds the file. Standing in it again gives your brain the exact cue it needs to reopen what it filed away, proving the thought was never actually lost in the first place, just quietly shelved under a label you couldn't see. So if your brain is going to close that file the second you cross a threshold no matter what, the trick isn't fighting the filing system, it's giving your thought a place to live outside the room-based file before that door swings shut. Your brain already has a natural off switch for this glitch, and it's remarkably low-tech. It's your own voice. Here's how it works in practice. The next time you're standing in the living room and you think, I need to grab my charger, don't just start walking. Say it out loud first. One short sentence. Getting my phone charger. That's it. Nothing elaborate. No need to narrate your whole day like a documentary. Just enough words to pull that thought out of the visual, location-based part of your memory and plant it somewhere more durable. The part of your brain that holds onto spoken language a little longer and a little more stubbornly than a passing mental note. By the time you cross into the kitchen, the doorway effect still fires exactly the way it always does, closing the file on the living room. But your intention isn't trapped inside that file anymore. You already moved it outside, into a format your brain treats differently. It helps to understand why this works, instead of just trusting it blindly. Speaking a thought engages a different kind of memory processing than simply thinking it. Silent thoughts are fragile. They're competing for space with everything else flickering through your mind. Easy to bump out the moment a new scene loads. Spoken thoughts get a bit more reinforcement, almost like writing something down instead of just picturing it. You're not overriding the doorway effect. You're just working alongside it, giving the thought a slightly sturdier shelf to sit on before the room changes underneath it. And here's the reframe worth sitting with. This blank moment was never your brain breaking down. It was your brain being efficient. Closing one scene cleanly so it can give full attention to the next one is a feature, not a failure. A brain that never closed old files would be dragging every half-finished thought from every room you've ever stood in, all day long. That would be exhausting in a completely different way. The doorway effect is your mind's way of traveling light. Over the next week, try noticing where these blanks actually show up, not just doorways. Watch what happens when you close a laptop mid-task and open it again later. Watch what happens when you switch tabs and try to remember what you were about to type. You'll likely notice the same flicker, the same tiny pause, the same brief search through an empty room in your mind. And notice whether saying your intention out loud before those transitions seems to keep the thought a little more intact on the other side. If you forget anyway, and sometimes you will, there's no need to spiral. Just walk back to where the thought started. Stand in the same spot, look at the same counter or the same screen. The room itself still holds the file. Standing there again is often enough to pull it right back out because you're recreating the exact scene your brain filed it under in the first place. So the next time you find yourself standing in the kitchen, blinking, wondering why you're even there, you can let go of the fear that quietly follows that moment. It's not your memory fading. It's not a sign you're aging faster than you'd like. It's just your brain, quietly and efficiently, closing one scene so it can open the next one with full attention. And now you know the small trick that keeps that file open a little longer. One sentence, spoken before you cross the threshold, and the thought stays with you instead of getting left behind in the room you just walked out of.